Well, November 5, 2024 was certainly a political earthquake heard around the United States as well as around the world. So today we're going to talk about the impacts, the implications of that election, not only in the United States, but Canada and certainly in other nations in the world.
A clear path forward requires looking back and learning. Good public policy requires human connection. It's a consideration of the facts, applying common sense and innovation. It's urban, it's rural, it's real life. We all have something to contribute. We all have a responsibility to get informed because there's a little piece of Canada in all of us, isn't there? Let's learn on this path together. This is Leaders on the Frontier.
So with me here today is Conrad Black to discuss that whole topic today. Welcome, Conrad Black, my friend.
Oh, thank you, David. Good to be with you.
Well, good to see you. And, you'd never believe that there's so much agenda unfolding. I want to start with the U.S. election. It seems like quite a while ago already, but it was a stunning election for Donald Trump and the Grand Old Party, as we saw not only the popular vote come on track for the GOP, they won that, but also they won the Electoral College for the White House, and they also cleaned up within the Congress. They got both the House and the Senate. Were you surprised by those electoral results, Conrad?
Actually, in this case, I must say that I was not. I predicted them quite accurately. Obviously, I followed the campaign extremely closely, and my reasoning was that all the polls were connected to left-wing universities or media outlets and were not worthy of being trusted, except Atlas Intel, Rasmussen, and Trafalgar, and they all showed
Indeed.
Trump leading by 2 to 3%, which proved to be accurate. But it's still he's got a mandate. It's a clear victory, and the good news, I think, apart from the result itself, is no one seriously contests any of the voting or vote counting procedures. The Democrats tried their old tricks in the Pennsylvania Senate race with Mark Elias, trying to bring in inadmissible ballots to keep Casey in the seat, but the higher courts in Pennsylvania wouldn't hear of it. And so there were all sorts of people saying, "Oh, it's going to be violent." I never believed that, but I thought there might be more efforts at skullduggery than there were. It was a clean election, in fairness to both parties, no evidence of any funny business, hard fought, well financed, $16 billion spent on presidency, and it was a clear cut victory, not a landslide, but a clear cut victory. And Trump has a mandate to do what he promised.
Indeed. So you mentioned about mandates, and you also mentioned one of our favorite polling firms is Rasmussen. According to Rasmussen, I believe that the three big issues that carried the day for the GOP were one related to affordability or the economy. The second one was the nonsense regarding the open border. And of course, the third had to do with culture. Would you say, was that your take on why the GOP resonated so much with across the board in the election?
Yes, I guess so. I know culture, we might want to give that a little definition. I mean, it wasn't people complaining that the quality of opera was declining.
No, indeed. Yes. I think it was anti-woke. Comes to mind.
Look, I think the green terror, the wokeness, the white privilege argument, the systemic racism argument, this atomization, which really got going with Obama, that everybody had to look through all public issues through the prism of racialization, which is nonsense. 95% of Americans don't really care what race anybody is. They're decent people trying to get on with their lives. And in the end, Trump basically said that. He said, "Look, we're all Americans. Let's raise the flag, salute the flag, and all build the country together." And people were sick of that backbiting and endless fault finding and the denigration of American history. And And yes, on the economic side, they all remember. They may not be all of them literate, particularly, or even particularly numerate, but they know from going to the grocery store and the gas station that when Trump was there, per capita disposable income increased 8.5%, and when Biden was there, it declined by 3.5%. And you don't have to be Einstein as a mathematician to figure out the implications of that, especially if it's your money. And yeah, the border. I mean, how on earth the Democrats thought they could simply let 10 or 12 million people? I don't doubt most of them are decent people, but on the other hand, you just can't do that. I mean, no country can function without maintaining its borders.
Now, obviously, the inauguration is January 20th. So things have not even been installed yet as a new presidency. But there seems to be kind of like a Trump bump, if you can say, and I want to talk about that a little bit with you, in the sense that out of this election, there seems to be kind of a change in optimism that's going on. I've noticed the recent survey. I think the New York Fed survey just showed a record high of small business optimism since what is it, 2021. You've got growth in the stock market, but also in the culture. It's fascinating, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, Conrad, but you've got Donald Trump, the man of the year on Time magazine. You have this kind of a sense of anti-woke sentiment, like this tide is turning in terms of culture, even in religious faith. And he was at the dedication of the incredible cathedral Notre Dame in Paris. So what's going on here? Is this a new kind of zeitgeist that's happening as well? I guess what I'm trying to get at is this wasn't just an electoral victory, but is it too much to say that this is also a cultural moment?
I don't think it is too much. I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right, David. You've got a couple of elements here. I think one is you're right. It wasn't just one president retires and another is elected. Obviously, that happens, quite often in American history. And it wasn't just that. It was a change of the philosophical orientation of one group for another. And I think I mean, watching the Homeland Security Secretary say the border is secure on a split screen on Fox News, where in the other half of your screen, there's hundreds of people just walking across the border, like you or I crossing the street we live on or something. And the whole thing, the diversity, equity, tyranny, the green extremism. The constant criticism of everything American, the reexamination of American history, the attempt to present the great United States of America as essentially a slaveholding operation, all of this, they just couldn't stand it anymore.
So let's shift topic a little bit to the issue of the media. You certainly have had an incredible leadership role yourself as a media mogul. So if we look at the mainstream media, it's quite a story in this last election where the legacy media really weighed in thoroughly for a Harris presidency. And it seems to me that are they in a crisis now when it comes to credibility? I mean, you just cited the recent case of George Stephanopoulos and ABC paying out $15 million in a lawsuit with Donald Trump successfully winning that kind of agreement. But you have, it's just stunning, the example after example where you had things like MSNBC, you had Morning Joe and Marika calling Trump a Nazi, an authoritarian, and then a few weeks later sitting down for coffee at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, it's kind of like, doesn't that create a credibility gap with the legacy media now?
Yeah, Mika Brzezinski's father, Zbigniew Brzezinski, you very well, and her mother, was the niece of Edvard Beneš, the Czechoslovak premier at the time of Munich.
The irony.
And Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski, as you know, was President Carter's national security advisor. Very
Yes.
able man, a Pole, well, a Polish father and a Czech mother. They knew what Nazis were like. They knew what they were like, and they knew
Indeed.
that Donald Trump was not a Nazi. It's this. What's the right word? Is this not? It's not just indiscipline. This recklessness, where
Yeah,
where
indeed.
where it's like calling, say, a person you buy a newspaper from at your newspaper stand on your way downtown in the morning is rude. You say, "You're Satan. You're Satan. You're being rude to me." I mean, it's just this absurd
Well,
childish.
they end up being clowns. I mean,
Yeah,
how can anyone take them seriously now?
yeah,
It's bizarre. And this is what I'm probably naively hoping for, that out of these kinds of elections where the rhetoric goes utterly over the top, that people realize that you're not serving anybody, least of all the electorate, with this kind of histrionic, dramatic language. So, anyways, we'll wait and see on that one.
yes,
Let's turn to cabinet picks. It's very interesting. I mean, there's so many of them. They're
yeah,
unfolding rapid fire over the last time from the moment of the election. You've, of course, got J.D. Vance, the vice president. You've got Tom Homan in terms of border security. Marco Rubio, Senator Marco Rubio from Florida, as the Secretary of State nomination, and Mike Walter in national security. And of course, one of our friends, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, for the head of the National Institute for Health, and even Russell Vogt. I've certainly followed him closely for the offices of management and budget. So, are you hopeful that there's some very capable cabinet possibilities here in the Trump administration?
not only capable, but seriously determined to make radical reforms. I don't mean reckless, authoritarian, destructive reforms. I mean
Yes.
serious re-examinations of policies that have just become encrusted with excessive bureaucratization and just slovenly procedures that you get in any organization after a while if you don't update it. And I mean, some of them are bold choices. I think, look, Robert Kennedy is he's a pretty funny guy, and some of the things he said and done are not insusceptible to question. But look, I think that's a very good group, and it's not just a bunch of good old boys from Georgetown who have been in and out of government all their lives, and they are dedicated to the incoming president's program. And I think the country has given him a mandate to make substantive changes along the lines he's promised, and I think he's choosing a team that will do it with him, and that's
Indeed.
his right and his duty.
No, I think you're right. It signals a fundamentally transformative approach to reconfiguring the U.S. government in so many ways. And of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the economy and the size of the U.S. government. And of course, this DOGE effort, this Department of Government Efficiency effort. And he's made some very interesting appointments, including, of course, Elon Musk, as well as Vivek Ramaswamy. And it's fascinating. These two gentlemen bring a real determination and kind of an entrepreneurial zeal to the task. Are you optimistic that they'll be able to reform the size and scale of the U.S. government?
I think that I'm optimistic they'll make a difference. I don't know that they can get $2 trillion out of it, but I, in my opinion, they will certainly reduce spending and produce a greater efficiency, and they have the public behind them. With men like that and a mandate like this serving the president they do, I would be astounded as well as disappointed if they didn't make an appreciable difference. Now, with that said, I have no fear that they're just going to tear the government apart and reduce it to chaos, which some people have said. They won't do that. I mean, Elon Musk is he's an unusual cat, but meanwhile, his companies work well. I mean, as the president-elect said, he didn't look like any crackpot when they retrieved that missile. It was just coming down, and those arms went out and brought it in. It was a man who creates a company that can do that is deserves our attention.
Indeed. Yeah. So let's watch that one closely. Another one I'm very intrigued about, Conrad, and we've certainly talked about this over the years, is the whole phenomenon of state sponsored censorship within the media through big tech. And it's interesting that Brendan Carr, I think, is to head up the proposed candidate for the Federal Communications Commission. And I think there's a real effort now to look closely at how they get rid of this nonsense of censorship with the usual suspects from Google and Facebook and Apple, and really looking at the media. Are you hopeful that will turn that around and will get rid of the big tech censorship cartel?
Um, I'm hopeful we'll get some kind of reform to make the system work better. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work, but this business of them masquerading as a utility, a carrier, like a telephone company, having nothing to do with content, when in fact they censor people. Uh,
Hmm.
Literally, they purported to ban President Trump for life, if you recall, a few years ago.
Hmm.
I mean, we just can't have that. I mean, that runs that's thoroughly contrary to the First Amendment to the Constitution, with
Indeed.
freedom of
Yes.
expression for everybody. So yeah, I think there'll be progress, but again, you've got to approach that sort of thing carefully.
It's really quite remarkable. So, turning the attention to the world stage, we know that there's a new sheriff in town. There's another set of foreign policy priorities. Um, we've obviously got a lot of attention on Trump's picture of the Communist Party of China, as well as, of course, Russia and Iran. But what do you sense as what's going to happen? I mean, it's interesting. Before Donald Trump is even inaugurated, you have talks of peace breaking out in the Ukraine. You've got all kinds of interesting things unfolding in the Middle East. You've written extensively about here how Israel's made such a big impact. What do you expect differently under a foreign policy led by Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, on the two wars that are now going um, on Ukraine, I think the Biden administration deserves some credit for supporting the Ukrainians. And I'm not one of these, like many good friends of mine in the Republican Party, like Laura Ingraham, and well, I don't know him, the incoming vice president. Like I've never met him, so I'm not claiming intimacy with him. But they, in my opinion, underestimate the dangers of a Russian success in Ukraine. We cannot have Russia reabsorbing Ukraine. If we do, the Western alliance will look like a paper tiger, and we'll get back to all that business about the West's in decline. They have no backbone, they have no courage, and so forth.
Mhm.
I think Trump is going to advise the Iranian government through whatever the channels he uses on Inauguration Day that if they don't stand down that nuclear program, it will be taken down militarily. And if they don't assure the release of the hostages, terrible things are going to happen to them right away. And in that sense, it is a little like President Reagan coming in, and we will, I suppose, eventually know exactly what he said that caused the hostages to be released as he was giving his inaugural address. And I think that's so. I think we're going to get a lot of progress in both those things very soon. We shouldn't forget that the Ukrainians have put up a heroic fight against a much larger country, and the Israelis have done a masterly job in the front lines against terrorism.
Well, it's truly remarkable what's unfolding the last several weeks in all these theaters. So it'll be fascinating to see what a Trump administration does further as they're actually in office.
Mhm.
Okay, so turning to the bilateral relationship between Canada and the United States, you know so well we've talked extensively about the state of this country. Our great nation continues to be suffering from declines in productivity and standard of living. It almost
Flights
seems
to
like every
boom.
Pardon me?
Flights of capital. More money leaves Canada than comes into it every year.
Indeed, flights of capital as more money continues to leave this country, which is a seminal barometer around our future
And a
prosperity.
shocking statement about our competitiveness as a place to invest.
Indeed. And so this is the punchline, is that as we look at the future of Canada, if we've already had this massive outflow of capital out of this country, because that's going to predict the future earnings and prosperity of this country,
Yes.
we have an incoming administration that has an aggressive economic plan from soup to nuts, like no tax on tips,
Yeah.
to no tax on overtime, to a lowering of capital gains,
Yes.
to energy independence.
The lower
I mean, it
corporate
goes
tax.
lower corporate taxes. Is Canada going to be left in the dust, Conrad, when we look to the future as we're behind our major trading partner who also wants to turn around, who wants to look at a 25% tariff increase?
Look, I think we're under some pressure, but we certainly have the means to respond to it. This is a rich country with envied by the world, including the United States, by the resources we have. We have absolutely everything here except some types of tropical fruit. We have agriculture, forest products of all kinds, base metals,
Everything.
precious metals, everything in energy, all of it. And and we've been ashamed of our resources. We became self-conscious about being hewers of wood and drawers of water,
Hmm.
and got this brilliant idea that we'd run a service economy, oblivious to the fact that countries like India could do the same thing at a fraction of our cost.
Hmm.
So it was a bad strategy. What we should do is export everything we have that people want, which is all our resources, one kind or another, and profit from that and create circumstances that attract international investors, as well as the retention of capital generated by Canadians in Canada, much of which leaves the country. Because I mean, Canadians would rather invest outside Canada than in it. That's where we are now, and we should. If we do that, we'll be fine. And as for the American tariffs, look, that was Trump's opening cannon. I mean, he's a poker player, but basically it's a non sequitur. His chief complaint is our not our allowing undesirables to leave Canada and go to the U.S. We're not East Germany. We don't put up a wall to keep people in Canada, and it is really up to every country to to patrol and control its own borders. It's not up to us to do it for the Americans. And the real problem he's got is the failure of his predecessor to prevent millions of people crossing the southern border without any documentation. So, I mean, if it is true, as he says, that we're lax about letting nasty people into our country, some of whom then go on to the U.S., we should certainly straighten that out, and that's not expensive to do.
Yeah. So as we're kind of near the end of our far-reaching discussion here, Conrad, but it strikes me that is this potentially a seminal moment in Canada's history where
I think
we
so.
can either continue to suffer a kind of a muddled decline as we screw up every policy file, or we can have a renewal, frankly, of leadership in these policy areas and renew our country.
And it could turn on a dime. We could get a 180-degree turn in 6 months. I mean, all you need to do is what we just said: is change tax policy, change the orientation from a great hesitancy to compromise Mother Earth by extracting resources to a rational exploitation of resources and a sale of them as required to countries wishing them, and build prosperity and increasing
Indeed.
prosperity and the incentive system into our economic model. But I'm older than you, David. But when we were young, Canada was neck and neck with Australia as the second most prosperous country in the world after the U.S., leaving out the petro-states and the tax haven states. I'm not talking about Monaco and Luxembourg and Liechtenstein and Kuwait and Norway, really. I'm talking about integrated economies. And all kinds of them have passed us now. I mean, we have no excuse for having a lower standard of living than the Netherlands.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's interesting. Our friend Jordan Peterson, as
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
has decided to move from this great country, Canada, to the United States.
Yes.
And we know that as much as we have everything going for us as a country, including natural resources, including a tradition of freedom and entrepreneurship, what really matters is the quality of our team. And we're losing Jordan Peterson as an example. I think one of the intellectual public bright lights of our world
Yes.
to the United States. So
And the most
what's the
famous.
significance of that?
Well, Jordan's a good friend of mine, and I think the significance is that he's been persecuted, and he gets most of his income in the U.S., and he loves Canada. He doesn't want to leave, but they have persecuted him on the basis of 4 complaints that were political disagreements of view. I mean, you
Absurd.
simply can't treat people like this, and particularly not the most distinguished people in the country.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. So in this context, are we saying that the election that happened in the United States, this earthquake, not of just simply political significance, but cultural significance, could be an opportunity for renewal of our own country, this great country called Canada?
I believe so. I believe so. No, but we have to change our government too. I mean, but I think we will, and I think the opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, will be very good. I think he will win, and I think he'll be a very good prime minister.
Well, look, we've had a far-reaching conversation today, Conrad Black, and I want to thank you so much for spending the time to talk about today's topic, the United States election and Canada.
Not a bit. Thank you, David. Very interesting. But I always enjoy speaking with you, and let's do it again whenever
It
you
was a
want.
pleasure. Thank you.
Splendid. Thank you, David. Bye.
Thanks so much, Conrad. All the best, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.